So let's create the place model now. Well, before we do that, what is the place model actually? Well, MongoDB thinks in database, collections, and documents logic. This means we have a database which can contain one or multiple collections, and a collection can contain one or multiple documents. And in our case, each single document is a new place that we stored. That's the MongoDB side. From a Mongoose side, we think in schema and model logic. A schema is the blueprint of a document that we want to store. So in our case, the blueprint of a place. For example, we can make sure that a place must contain a title. So this is the blueprint, the schema. Based on the schema, we create the so-called model. And each instance of this model in our code will then result in a new document. So that's what we want to achieve right here. We want to create the schema and the model. And in the next lecture, we want to instantiate the model to make sure that we can store a new document or a new place in our project. Let's get started with the place schema therefore. For this, I'll go to the models folder, create a new file named place.js. Now the schema and the Mongoose model are concepts related to Mongoose. Therefore, we have to import Mongoose first. So we require Mongoose here. And the schema is also a special concept part of Mongoose. Therefore, we have to create a schema constant here, which accesses the schema method. Now we can create another constant. This will now be our actual schema, and we could call it place schema, as this is the specific schema for a single place. Here we now instantiate our schema and create a new JavaScript object. And this object now contains the logic for our blueprint of a later document. We have such a blueprint already actually as dummy code though, here in our places controllers file. Dummy places also has the general idea behind a document. We, for example, don't need this ID property anymore because the ID will be created automatically by MongoDB when we store a document. We'll see that later. But title, description, location, and so on, these are properties that we want to have in our document and therefore also in our schema. Let's start with the title and add the semicolon here. And we could say that the title should just be a string. That would be possible, but here I would rather add an object because I want to add more information to that title. Because as I said, the title should be of type string, but the title should also be required. This means the title must not be empty. And I guess this makes sense because a place without a title, well, not too helpful. Therefore, we should set required here to true. We can actually copy this because we might need that more often here. The second property is our description. The description, well, should also be a string and is required. Now I want to add a new property we didn't have so far in our places controller, and this is the image. Now one important note here. The image is not the actual file. When we work with databases, the image always is a URL, so a URL pointing towards a file which is not stored in our database. Because storing files or images in a database is not a good idea, because it kind of contradicts the idea of a database which should be fast and which should be able to execute the queries as quick as possible. If you imagine storing big files there, well, this would slow down your database, and this is definitely not what you want. Therefore, here we will use a URL. The URL will also be a string and will be required, so we can again use the same logic. We also need an address. The address, well, should also be a string and required. Let's get rid of these double empty spaces here. And then we also need the location. The location is a bit different because in contrast to our previous properties, we now have a nested object. Because here in our places controller, you can see that the location contains the lat and long properties. Now, Mongoose is able to interpret that, so we can easily also add a nested object here and now add the latitude, which here should not be of type string, but of type number. And required should again be true. Can actually copy paste this and also do the same thing for the longitude. So here we can also use this nested object logic. The last thing we need is our creator here. The creator will again be of type string and will be required. don't need the comma here. And the creator later will be replaced by a real unique ID. I mentioned that with the places already, that the ID will be created automatically by MongoDB. Same thing will happen later when we create a new user. For the moment, we'll just use dummy information, so we enter the user ID manually. And with that, we actually created our schema already. This was only step 1 though. As I said, we have the schema, then we need the model, and then each instance of the model will create the document. So to create this model, we now simply add module exports, and this should be equal to our Mongoose and now the model method. That's a special method available here in Mongoose, and model will return a constructor function later. We have to add 2 arguments to this function. The first argument is the name of the model. The convention here is to use an uppercase starting character and a singular form, no plural form. Well, as our model is here to create a new place, place is actually a fitting name, I guess. By the way, this will also be the name of our later collection. The collection will not have the uppercase starting character, and it will be plural though. So our collection will be named places then. The second argument is our schema that we want to refer to in our model, and that's our place schema right here. With that, we created our Mongoose schema and the corresponding model. Now it's time to use this model and to create our first document.